Oh, it appears that we're live. Welcome to Thinking Like a Lawyer, episode 4. Today we're talking about nuclear verdicts, and it's on a Sunday at like 2:30, so I can only imagine there is a gaggle of people that want to understand what is a nuclear verdict. So, let's break it down. As always, I'm the armchair attorney Matthew Leffler. My job is to try to break down legal topics that you may not have heard the definition of. So, what is a nuclear verdict? That's a great question. What I'll tell you right off the bat is it's not a legal term. A nuclear verdict is not a term that was coined by lawyers and not something that lawyers typically talk about. It is something, however, that is used to describe a type of verdict, and a verdict in a case typically that is over $10 million. A $10 million verdict is pretty substantial. So let's start talking about nuclear verdicts. In this episode, we're going to talk about a very specific case that's in the news right now of a trucking company going through a bankruptcy proceeding as a result of a nuclear verdict. We're going to talk a little bit on joint and several liability. This is a type of legal way of understanding who pays when something catastrophic happens. And we'll talk about something else that I think all of us try not to think about, but we do know is something we have to consider. So let's start off with a nuclear verdict. Nuclear. When you hear the word nuclear, it means one of two things typically: fission, like the making of power in a submarine or an aircraft carrier or a power plant, or in destruction, like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. That is the thing that they want you to think about. When we talk about nuclear verdicts, we're not talking about fission to generate power. We are talking about a verdict that is doing some massive destruction. Now, you might think, well, Matt, that sounds like kind of hyperbolic. It seems kind of weird to call a verdict in a trial a nuclear verdict. It's not like there's a bunch of innocent people that get destroyed because someone gets a judgment against them. That's a very specific thing that has been chosen to be used to describe these cases. Like I said, nuclear verdict is not a legal term. It is just a way to describe a certain dollar figure. What people generally mean when they say a nuclear verdict is that the penalty that the person is paying is far larger than what they should be paying. Typically, once you hear the word nuclear verdict, your mind is supposed to think that that's not what's supposed to happen. That's a conscious decision that I think you should be aware of. When the term is used, it is used to manipulate you and make you have an opinion about that topic that you didn't have beforehand. So that's the nuclear part. The verdict part. Well, the verdict typically means that the company has decided to litigate. It has gone to the jury. The jury has found a finding of liability, and now we're talking about damages. That's what we're talking about: damages. So here's the question: how valuable, or how do you put a value on human life? How much is a human life worth? How often do you think about that? In the practice of law, like other professions that deal with these catastrophic events, death is never far away. Death is very close because you're not getting involved unless there is something terrible. There has been a death, a dismemberment, or some lasting injury. That's the verdict. Nuclear verdict. Some catastrophic explosion of some sort, and a jury has found liability. That is what a nuclear verdict is all about. But it's all founded generally on the laws of negligence, the laws and the rules of negligence. Negligence is very complicated. We're not going to talk about that now. We're really going to focus today on one aspect of how you determine damages in negligence, and that is what we call joint and several liability. So we talked before, something happened, someone's dead, someone's injured. Who pays? When you come to me, I can't, or lawyers like me, I can't bring back the dead. We lack that ability. We can't do anything other than hold the responsible parties accountable. And accountable in this world is damages. It is money. It is how we resolve the issue. We make you whole by having this as what we do. So, joint and several liability means if there's more than one person who is responsible, both parties could have done something. Maybe there's multiple defendants that might be responsible. Any one of them pays the entire amount. So when you're jointly and severally liable, the person who pays that verdict is whoever has the most insurance. Insurance is an interesting thing in the transportation business. Anywhere between 3 to 4% of your total revenue goes into paying for insurance. And so it's really interesting to see how much insurance you're required to have. In transportation, it can vary anywhere from $75,000, $150,000 up to maybe $5 million. That's not the value of life, though. As we mentioned, how do you determine the value of life? Well, the Department of Transportation has kind of helped us a little bit. They have a very interesting thing that I'll read you. It's called the Departmental Guidance on Valuation of Statistical Life in Economic Analysis. This is also abbreviated as the VSL. The VSL says that a human life today is about 11.2, 11.3, some amount, a little bit over $10 million. That's the amount of money that a human life is generally worth. And we can talk about the statistical thing later on. Let's talk about the case. So we had to start off with the foundation. For you to think like a lawyer, you have to first understand, what is a nuclear verdict? What does that even mean? Well, now we know. It's a big judgment against a company for some amount of money, usually over $10 million. So let's look at a real life example. I'm going to read something from this accident report. This is a case of a trucking company called Marvin Keller Trucking. Marvin Keller Trucking is a small trucking company out of Sullivan, Illinois. They have drivers, they have people going around all over the place, and now they're in bankruptcy. They are in bankruptcy as a result of a nuclear verdict. They were hit with a massive judgment after a jury trial. These are the facts of the case. It's 11:31 p.m. The truck driver for Marvin Keller is driving down I-65 Interstate 64. In the other direction, on the other side of the highway, is a man named Christopher Short. Christopher Short's 44 years old, and he's driving a pickup truck, something like that. The driver for Marvin Keller leaves the path that they're on, crosses the center line, and has a head-on collision with Christopher Short. Both vehicles leave the highway, and Christopher Short, a father of 4, dies on the scene. Truck driver, generally speaking, is okay. This is the worst day of a lot of people's lives. I don't know about you. I don't know how often you think of death or deal with death. I have had a close family member die in an automobile accident. And I think about Christopher Short. When that truck came across the median at 11:30 at night, do you think he knew that that was his last few moments on Earth? Do you think he knew he wouldn't see those 4 kids again? Do you think he knew that it would cause this trucking company to go bankrupt? I don't know. I have no idea. What did the truck driver think? Did he have a bout of sneezing and coughing? He couldn't control himself? Did he fall asleep? 11 o'clock at night? I don't know. I don't know what either of them experienced. But the difference is that driver of that truck from Marvin Keller gets to go home. Christopher Short doesn't. That's not what's in the cards for him. And so when you see these articles talking about nuclear verdicts, there's a very specific reason they're talked about this way. Because here's what happens. The nuclear verdict is what gets in the news. The fact that 4 children have lost their father is not the headline. The headline is, look at how much money this company has to pay for that person in that accident. Because here's what happens next. I don't bring back the dead. Lawyers don't bring back the dead. We litigate. We find the money. We bring it home to the client. Doesn't help you. Doesn't help solve the problem. What happens next is that they use this term nuclear verdict to make you dislike and hate, maybe, the people who sue for these damages. That the money amount is too high. It's too high. A human life can't be worth $10 million. Oh, Lauren, always trying to do something. Here's the thing. If you understand what litigation like this looks like, it is about finding payment for the victims of the families who have lost a loved one. You can't bring back the dead. But what you can do is you can help reimburse the victims. But when you call them nuclear verdicts, the desired outcome is for you to think that maybe we should have tort reform. Tort reform is a broad category. I fully support tort reform. It's important. There are things that happen that don't make a ton of sense. But if the object of tort reform is to find a way to reduce how victims are compensated for catastrophic accidents like this, that should make you pause. And why is it that Marvin Keller is going bankrupt from a $10 million verdict if we know the Department of Transportation says a human life is worth $11 million? These are the things you have to understand in this business. There are many large trucking companies that carry enough liability insurance to cover catastrophic events. But when you have a lot of carriers that can't absorb that type of damage when there is a catastrophic event, it should make you pause. If you see the word nuclear verdict, it's not about fission. We're not breaking apart atoms and creating explosions or power. A nuclear verdict is just a way to manipulate you, to take a term that's not legal and apply it to your context of understanding when a company was found liable for what they did. That's all that it is. So what I hope you to do today, and we're going to recap it right now. Nuclear verdicts is not a legal term of art. It's not law. It is a way to describe something. And the way that we're describing it is things over $10 million. The other piece of what this means is that it's designed to make you think that it was inappropriately amounted. Let's say the question here. Let's see. I can click the buttons. How does this work? We'll show Lauren's. Lauren, always a pleasure. And we have Greg. What did Greg have to say? Also, the ELD would save lives. Their facts and suggestions mean little. You know, ELDs are important. I mean, the thing about this case is just to give a demonstration more than anything about what it is that a nuclear verdict relates to. Every case is different. Liability will always be associated differently. Whether this driver had enough hours or was tired, that's still, the court found, that the jury should say, found that he was. But I want you to take this away and think, what is a nuclear verdict? Not a legal thing. What is joint and several liability? That's what I want to focus on for the next minute or so, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. Joint and several liability basically says, who's ever responsible, one person pays for all of it. In this context, it's the trucking companies that have the liability. Oh, Andy Turnbull, what's up, buddy? Yeah, we're putting in some work. We're trying to do some live content on days that I don't necessarily always do that stuff. End of the day, what I want people to understand is that the law is not something that's unapproachable. My goal is to help you understand what it is that you're seeing. And if you have questions about the law, you should understand them. I want you to be an armchair attorney. You can do what I do. You can understand what these things are and why they result this way. Why is it that the trucking company was found liable? Well, the driver crossed the center line and collided head on with another person. That vehicle operator died. 4 kids lose their father. That trucking company gets sued. They don't settle. They continue to negotiate, but they don't settle. They go to court. They go to the jury. The jury returns the verdict. You are liable. Trucking company doesn't have enough insurance, so they wind down the business, declare bankruptcy. And in every single headline all across the United States, you see the nuclear verdict is responsible. Underinsurance is a problem. We need more insurance if we understand that human life is worth more than $5 million. Like I said, the statistical value of human life is about $11 million. So that's basically it for today in the Armchair Attorney. A few things we talked about earlier this week. I'll just kind of do a quick little recap. So we talked about Elon Musk buying Twitter. Well, apparently he did in fact sell $8.5 billion of Tesla stock. That's why the Tesla stock took a little bit of a nosedive. That's what happens when you use your equities to act as collateral for loans, and then you liquidate them in order to have the capital on hand to make that deal. Non-competes are terrible. You talked on them with the folks at Freightways with Kaylee Nix. It was awesome. You should check it out. I had a chance to talk to Gunnar Miller. He's phenomenal. We talked again a little bit about non-competition agreements. And that is the end of today. A couple of pieces of announcements. I have 2 babies coming. Tomorrow is the very first day that I'll be running Armchair Attorney full time. And my wife and I are expecting a baby. How exciting is that? Well, as always, I appreciate you tuning in, and we'll have more of these in the future. If there are legal questions you find interesting, oh, hold on a second. We got a question here. $12 million liability insurance. Would the attorneys just increase the lawsuit? Still, the company closes. That is a really interesting question. That's a great question. Let's take a moment and look at that. That's a wonderful question. So lawyers don't make the value of human life. We don't get to do that. If you look at workers' compensation, for example, there's like numbers associated for anything that you lose. Like lose a finger, there's a dollar amount. Lose an ear, there's a dollar amount. All of these things have specific things to think about. If you increase the liability insurance, what most lawyers are going to do is they're going to ask for your policy limitations. When you're involved with this litigation, the number one thing that you ask is, I want to copy your policy limitations, because that's what I'm going to go for. That's what we're going to try to shoot for. It's a good question. I think that if you did increase the policy limitations, it would have less overall impact than you would think. So the way that this works is it's a lot like statistics. All over the country, in courthouses, in every little nook and cranny of this amazing country, they take the data from the verdicts. There's compendiums and documents you can buy that say, here's all the different lawsuits. Here's what they settle for. What really happens here is like, what's a human life worth is about their earnings and a couple other things. Those don't really change. So the dollar amounts may not change. What ends up causing more of the higher levels of liability is either a default judgment. So the defendant never even showed up. So the plaintiff gets whatever they ask for. That's a case where we saw, I think, like $1 trillion lawsuit or something. The other piece of this is that if you defend it and you find out that your client or the defendant company did things that they knew were wrong, so willful, wanton, or reckless behavior, that increases your liability. And in those circumstances, for reckless behavior, insurance may not cover that. So I do think that's a great question, Matt. I don't believe you would have that outcome, but I could be wrong. Again, I'm just a simple armchair attorney. And Lauren, yes, thank you for the baby news. It's going to be really great. I'm so excited. As always, guys, one last thing here. Let's got Greg's got a question. How are the facts and figures? Okay. I see he is liable. However, what facts and figures do they use to come up with their figures? Income, how much someone was loved. Oh my gosh. That will be the next installment we have. What are damages? That's a great question. And I'll even talk about that in the context of cases I used to litigate in toxic tort. To kind of talk about them briefly, Greg, what are the types of things that inquire what's your valuation? If you have minor children, if you have people that are dependent upon you, if you have your income is a big piece of that too. And they'll project out your income until the age of your retirement. That is all part of the damages. You may also have damages of medical care. So if you don't die, this is a trade secret, just so you know. Generally speaking, in litigation and in injuries and death, it is more affordable for the company. It's a less liability when the person dies than if the person lives. When the person lives, you have future medical, you have pain and suffering, all of these things. In the wrongful death or the death type of case, it is your compensation, it is the loss of consortium, the loss of your loved ones, and it is this idea of the people you leave behind. So that is a little primer on damages. That's a whole other thing. We will absolutely cover that in a future episode. I think it's really interesting to dive into, but we're getting close to 20 minutes. The attention span of all is a little limited. So on the Sunday afternoon, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. If you're watching a recorded version of this, please hit the buttons that say that this is something you find interesting. You can follow me along. You hit the little bell button, and I'll talk about more things in the future. As always, you will be an armchair attorney. Just give it some time. Have a great day. Right? That seems reasonable. That seems right. Right? Are we done? Okay, hit the button. Oh, right. I do that. Have a great day.